The streets of New Orleans, Louisiana, depending on who you ask, are often considered by many as the deadliest streets of America. One neighborhood in particular, made famous by the artist of Cash Money and UTP Records, is the CJ Pete, aka Magnolia housing projects, along with the St. Thomas, Desire, Florida, and Callio. The Noya for years would be considered as one of the most violent projects in A&O. These mean, grimy streets would birth one of the most notorious street figures to ever step foot out of the Magnolia. This is the story of Donald Dyer, aka Blabber.
When it come to that Magnolia, they be acting like the Noya, the only one got the rat. Yeah, we know gangsters a rat, you dig? I don't rock with no rat. You see what I'm saying? If my mama violates the debt before this honor code, I'ma disown her.
Donald Dyer, aka Blabber, came up in the era of teas and blues. In fact, at the age of 10, Blabber would be sentenced to 2 years at Milne Boys Home on Franklin Avenue for possession of teas and blues. This would be far from the end of Blabber's run-in with the law. At the age of 14, Blabber would be sent to Scotland for 1430, aka homicide. Blab would later be transferred to Angola State Penitentiary. Angola State Penitentiary is known for being one of the most violent prisons in America. Warden Earl Kane would refuse to send Blabber down the walk, stating that at his age, the seasoned inmates would see him as food. Earl Kane would instead send Blab to Wig, the working cell block. Blab would be informed, any mess-ups, and I'm putting you up there by the guerrillas. At the age of 16, Blab will be locked up in OPP, aka Orleans Parish Prison. If you have ever been locked up in OPP when them bandits was running wild and dudes was slinging that knife like 90 Go West, that place wasn't for the weak. If you know, you know. While Blab was doing a jokes in the parish, his Wanda, the mother of Blackie Mo, would confide in him in regard to her son being on life support due to being hit up. Not wanting Blackie Mo to suffer, Blabber would advise Miss Wanda to pull the plug and spare her son the suffering that he was enduring. Miss Wanda would respect Blab's opinion, ultimately taking Blackie Mo off of life support. With the surge of EPs on social media, it's a well-known fact to onlookers from around the world that Eric Maurice and Blackie Mo were two notorious street figures out the Noya that had strong relationships with Blabber. I'm painting this EP with a broad stroke. However, if you look through a wide-angle lens at the streets of New Orleans and its criminal activity that came with it, Blabber would be recognized for surviving every era. As a young child, Ivory Harris, aka Be Stupid, would even run around with choppers Blab had taken the clip out of. It is this mindset that will contribute to the reoccurring circle of violence in the city. Dudes at young ages were being groomed to be killers, spawning notorious crews such as the infamous Hot Boys and the Bird Gang, which was a younger generation of hitters out the Noya. Born and raised in the Magnolia, Blab would hold himself accountable for the deletion of 3 of the original Hot Boys, Sterling, Dooney, and Mosquito. In 98, Donald Dyer, aka Blabber, will get caught up on a federal charge in New Orleans, Louisiana. The charges would stem from his criminal activity throughout the city and his relationship with Terrence Williams. On March 12th of 1998, Donald Dyer, aka Blabber, will plead guilty to conspiring to possess 100 grams of that boy with intent to distribute in violation of 21 U.S.C. 841 and 846. The courts would sentence Blabber to imprisonment for a term of 480 months on June 24th of 1999. Blabber would appeal the sentence, challenging the court's assessment of a substantial increase in his base offense level. The Fifth Circuit will vacate on the grounds that there was insufficient evidence to find that certain homicides considered during sentencing were relevant conduct within the federal sentencing guidelines and remanded for resentencing. Blabber will be resentenced to a term of 400 months. Not to go unmentioned, Blabber will run EPs to his cellie who was wearing a wire. June 7 of 2021, at the time of his motion for compassionate release, Blabber will be 52 years old and serving a 320-month sentence in Yazoo City Medium, FCI, after pleading to participating in a conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute that 11.5. Blab had served 22 years of his sentence and was projected to be released on April 21st of 2022. Blabber's criminal history was lengthy, including violent crimes dating back to his youth. Blab would also have a lengthy history of disciplinary infractions while in prison. As recently as 2018, Blab was disciplined for multiple infractions, including fighting with other inmates, possessing unauthorized items, and getting loaded. Although Blabber had exhausted his administrative remedies, he would nevertheless fail to establish eligibility for a sentence reduction. Blab will file a request for compassionate release on July 21st of 2020. He will be denied relief on August 16th of 2020. After filing multiple motions, Blabber would ultimately be released from prison. Blabber, an OG in the game, had stood tall in the paint and walked his time down and was finally free. Upon his release, Blabber would do a one-on-one interview with Francine McNair, aka Queen France. However, this interview would never surface online. Standing on principles, Blabber would refuse to do an interview with Terrence Williams. He would instead go live with Dooney Boy Johnny Boo. It was during this live session that Blabber would confess that yes, he indeed still talks to Terrence. In fact, Blabber will go on to say that he still has love for Terrence, further stating that Terrence is like a brother to him, and I quote, "We sweat blood together in the streets of the NO." Unbeknownst to many, dudes that are still locked up check in with Blabber, calling and writing letters. Before his passing, Johnny Davis, aka Tim War Fat, would even write and call Blabber. This was the story of Donald Dyer, aka Blabber.
When y'all talk about the city of New Orleans, uptown, especially uptown, you can't miss me. If you do, you hate me. When you talk about the city of New Orleans, uptown area, you can't miss me. If you do, you hate me.
Before I drop an album, before I did anything, you know what I'm saying? I was a hood celebrity, you dig? I'm a gangster in the hood just having a good time. So when I show love to all my people, I'm gonna get that same love back.
Well, being from the Magnolia Project, people from all over the world, when they come to New Orleans, they want to see what that is.
I'm Skip Boo from all the Magnolia, grew up in the Tyler Dynaco.
I'm Kenneth Boo, you hear me? I was raised uptown in the Magnolia.
I'm original Dooney Boy Johnny Boo, man, from the Magnolia Project.
2400 Washington Avenue, New Orleans, Louisiana. 70115 is the actual physical address for the Magnolia CJP Public Housing Project. Some would argue that the actual physical address is 3301 Ferret Street. If you know, you know. The Magnolia that was designated by the city for black residents only consisted of low-rise brick buildings arrayed around grassy courtyards, eventually growing to include 1,400 apartments. The Housing Authority of New Orleans would bulldoze several square blocks to build the Magnolia. Frank Pania, a local business owner, would have to move his barbershop from its footprint. Frank would then open the Dewdrop Inn across the street, selling food and drinks to the workers building the complex. Frank would later expand, adding live music in 1945. The new Dewdrop Inn would go on to be one of the most historical monuments in the NO. This is the story of the Wild Magnolia. Before Hurricane Katrina would make landfall in New Orleans in 2005, the privatization of public housing was already underway. Since 1996, Hope grants through the Department of Housing and Urban Development were used by developers and organizations to demolish and replace public housing projects with mixed-income housing in order to redevelop entire neighborhoods. The Housing Authority of New Orleans has been in federal receivership since 2002, granting HUD direct control over New Orleans public housing. After Katrina, the rate of demolition for viable and structurally sound public housing in New Orleans would increase under the guise of disaster recovery. CJP, aka the Magnolia, was one of the big four public housing developments that were slated for complete demolition after Katrina. Since 1998, CJP had been in the process of being emptied and partially demolished, with only 144 people living there at the time of the storm. In spite of community resistance, the Nolia would be fully demolished and redeveloped as Harmony Oaks, beginning in late 2008. At its height, the Nolia would operate 1,403 public housing units. Today, only 143 units on the site are designated as public housing. Phase 1 of the Magnolia Project was constructed in 1941, bordered by Louisiana Avenue, Magnolia Street, Washington Avenue, and LaSalle Street. In 1955, Magnolia was expanded north past Clara Street, incorporating 6 additional city blocks, creating the Old Side, New Side. Taladana would be realigned during the 1955 expansion, resulting in the disappearance of the 3-block-long residential street, Belmont Place. The only remnants of Belmont Place will be 3 houses facing Taladana before it joins with Louisiana Avenue. During the Jim Crow era of racial segregation, the city's main medical care facility for blacks will be Flint Goodrich Hospital, located on the southwest end of Ferret Street on Louisiana Avenue. Fun fact, the first 3 black mayors of New Orleans were all born at Flint Goodrich Hospital. From 1952 through 1978, the housing manager for the Noya was Cleveland Joseph Pete. In the 1980s and 90s, living conditions in the Noya had been neglected. They would severely decline when that hard would hit the scene. Crime activity would increase, as well as the patrol of the corrupt NOPD. In addition to being home of famous hip-hop artists, Soulja Slim, Juvenile, and others, Magnolia would have one of the highest deletion rates of any housing projects in the United States. In New Orleans, as in other big cities in America, crime and violence typically will go unseen by visitors. Most of the deletions are highly concentrated in specific neighborhoods, corners, or housing projects. The Magnolia will be one of those locations. In 2003, New Orleans would again have the highest deletion rate in the United States, with 275 in total, for a per capita rate 8 times worse than New York City's. According to the Times-Picayune, nearly all 275 of those crushings in 2003, along with the people accused of crushing them, would all have criminal records. Among the victims, 4th and the 3rd were smashed within 3 months, their last arrests. In other words, America's policies were fueling violence and deletions in some of its biggest cities. In 2001 and 2002, demolition of portions of the Noya will begin as part of the Housing Authority of New Orleans revitalization plan. By 2005, only the 1955 expansion had been raised. The majority of the remaining buildings were vacant and fenced off, with only a portion still occupied when the area flooded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Redevelopment will be delayed in the aftermath of the disastrous flood, which devastated the majority of the city. In late 2008, the Magnolia projects were vacated. The majority of the buildings were razed. On January 7th of 2009, local, state, federal, and HUD officials met to break ground on a new $183 million CJP community meant to replace the Magnolia projects. The plan would include 460 units, a recovery school district, and YMCA in the first phase. 2/3 of the community will be mixed use and mixed income, with the rest being market value apartments and townhomes. In 2011, the rebranded Harmony Oaks community, developed by McCormick Warren Salazar, opened as a mixed-use community of 406 apartments and homes, including public housing, low-income, and market-rate dwellings. The new Harmony Oaks, redeveloped on the old Magnolia Project site, is located on some 41 acres southeast of the intersection of Claiborne and Louisiana. The site is bounded by Washington Avenue to the east, LaSalle Street and Ferret to the south, Louisiana and Taladana Avenues to the west, and South Claiborne Avenue to the north. The redeveloped projects are considered to be a continuation of New Orleans as the NO moves forward towards new urbanism, favoring urban neighborhood development over suburban living. Per records from the Federal Bureau of Investigations, at one point, the Noya would be one of the most notoriously dangerous housing projects in the entire United States. It was reported that the Magnolia projects had the highest deletion rate of any housing project in the city, even more than the Melf and the Callio. The Noya would have a local crime rate higher than many full municipalities in the United States, spawning a significant influence in New Orleans with its extremely high deletion rate. Taking a look back in time, in 1951, there would be 66 crushings, with 53% of them committed with Blix. This would be from citing stats from the Orleans Parish Coroner's Office. In 1973, out of the 252 deletions, 71% would be committed with Blix. Infamously known for street crews, the Four Horsemen will be one of the first to stomp the grounds of the Magnolia projects. You can't mention Magnolia without mentioning OGs like Jeff Sanders, Roy Lee, Bo Hickey, Blabber, KC, Lester Duplessis, Jackie Moe, and Eric Maurice, just to name a few. The mid-90s will birth an entirely new generation of street figures in Magnolia. The Hot Boys, a notorious street crew known for crushing, taking hits, and jacking, will be in full effect in the mid to early 90s. As the Hot Boys will seemingly die off and be incarcerated by the late 90s, the Dooney Boys will be in power throughout Magnolia. This run wouldn't last long, as going forward into the 20th century, other notorious street crews will roam the streets of Magnolia. Although Magnolia will be involved in several street wars, one of the most infamous wars will be Magnolia versus the Yo. Fought in the mean streets of the NO, this war would spawn casualties on both sides.